Now I have the great privilege and pleasure of introducing the recipient of the Hurlbut Award, Professor Lisa Ouellette. This award is given to a professor who strives to make teaching an art. And I honestly cannot think of a better way to describe Professor Ouellette's approach to her role as a professor. I think one of my classmates put it best. Over the course of our academic careers, we have all encountered many professors who are amazingly brilliant, and many who are amazingly effective lecturers, and many who are amazingly dedicated mentors. But it is incredibly rare to find a single individual who is all three at once. Professor Ouellette is that rare individual. I knew I wanted to take a class with Professor Ouellette before I even started law school. Sometime in the summer before 1L, I was obsessively researching Stanford and discovered a law professor summer reading list. I expected to find some tort outlines, or at least something by Scott Turow, and instead was excited and surprised to see one of my guiltiest of pleasures on the list, Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality, a highly nerdy fan fiction based on Harry Potter. Professor Ouellette was the professor that put it on the list, and I knew I couldn't wait to meet this SLS professor with fantastic taste in fiction. That spring, I took Intro to Intellectual Property and discovered that Professor Ouellette was everything I'd hoped for and more. Her dedication to teaching is evident from the minute you step into her classroom. She uses every teaching tool imaginable and takes the time to explain why, based on research into teaching techniques, that particular tool will be most effective. She also takes the time to make sure her class is fun and engaging. She takes advantage of the interesting problems presented by her subject, intellectual property, and uses examples from contemporary life, like a cute animated short, or even draws hypotheticals from our own lives. I think we all remember that time she used a clip of our classmate Sammy performing with his a cappella group on the sing-off. I can't tell you how much of a gift that was to all of us. The video and the memes it produced became a fixture of our Facebook page. Finally, she is a dedicated mentor. I have countless examples that I could share to show the extent to which Professor Ouellette not only cares about her students, but prioritizes them. She does everything she can to get to know us, whether it's in her office during office hours, over pumpkin bars after a hike of the dish, while she's belaying us at the Arriaga rock climbing wall, or giving feedback on a research paper for something completely unrelated to her class. I have no doubt that this effort that Professor Ouellette puts into teaching and mentoring makes a difference. You know, I found that when you ask a lawyer why she chose her practice area, she might tell you that it's because she had a great professor once, a professor that was so passionate it made her fall in love with the subject matter. Personally, I'm confident that the future will see a lot of great intellectual property lawyers coming out of Stanford Law School. And so it is with great excitement and appreciation that I present this award to Professor Lisa Ouellette.
Thank you, Courtney, for that generous introduction. And thank you, graduates, for the privilege of addressing you today as the recipient of the Hurlbut Award. I assume it's only because you didn't have the option of choosing an amazing stand-up comic, but I really am overwhelmed by this honor, particularly because I have such deep respect and affection for so many of you. You, the class of 2018, are an impressive group. In your time at Stanford, you've not only learned to speak the language of the law, including jargon like supplemental jurisdiction or collateral estoppel, you've also learned to use the law. You helped write a will so a Native American couple's tribal regalia could be preserved by their grandchildren. You helped a prisoner protect the right to observe a religious holiday by winning an appeal in the Ninth Circuit. You won a ruling that the government wrongfully withdrew endangered species protection for the bi-state sage grouse. You advanced the frontiers of knowledge with Stanford Law Review notes on classified state secrets, false confessions by people with intellectual disabilities, anti-competitive patent settlements. You've used your already impressive advocacy and leadership skills in everything from writing op-eds to founding new organizations to advance dialogue and seek justice, both in the broader community and right here at Stanford Law School. I think there are few obstacles that a team of Stanford Law students can't conquer. You're pretty much the Avengers of law school graduates. But as the Supreme Court wrote in a recent patent law case, quoting that well-known source of legal authority, the Spider-Man comics, "In this world with great power, there must also come great responsibility." I love being a teacher of intellectual property law. We get the best fact patterns. And yet giving you any advice on how to use your legal superpowers responsibly is a daunting task. What can I say that you haven't already heard before? And more importantly, how can I teach you anything here without interactive clickers and handouts? You already know all the graduation speech tropes. Follow your passion, don't let others define you, take risks, wear sunscreen. They're all good advice, especially that bit about the sunscreen, but platitudes seem inadequate in this moment when you are stepping out as some of the world's most qualified law school graduates into a world that desperately needs some superheroes. The real world might not be in as bad a shape as the world at the end of Avengers: Infinity War, which I won't spoil for the 10 of you who haven't seen it, but the time you spent at Stanford has not been easy. In any recent month, you could open the papers to read about another school shooting, another incident of racially charged policing, more allegations of sexual assault by prominent men across the political spectrum, more records being set by the changing climate, and escalating global tensions and threats to national security. Each month also seems to bring a new story about increasing polarization, echo chambers, and lack of interest in underlying facts, making it seem ever more difficult to address these collective challenges. I would love to be able to stand here and confidently point you toward the best path for using your impressive legal skills to confront these problems. But standing here in front of you, for my last time in my role as teacher, I'm going to use the one phrase us teachers dare use only as a last resort. I don't know. Still, I decided that my uncertainty is itself a useful message. Having a Stanford law degree doesn't mean that you have to have all the answers. It's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to change your mind. And it's okay to keep asking the important questions, since what your Stanford degree does mean is that each of you has an impressive toolkit for answering them. You have the tools to recognize that the real world isn't neatly divided into good and evil, to construct the best arguments in favor of those who might initially seem like villains, and to seriously reflect about what you will use your superpowers for. I'm still learning these lessons. I started at Stanford not long before most of you. Just as some of you surely worried that you were an admissions committee mistake, I worried that I was an appointments committee mistake. Don't tell all these folks behind me. My physics PhD gave me a lot of skills that are pretty unique on a law school faculty, but I wasn't sure that the ability to make a carbon nanotube transistor would be all that useful in front of a classroom. I was convinced that you would start asking me your brilliant questions, I would have to admit, I don't know, and you would curse your bad luck for having a professor who was just a few years out of law school. And then you did, in fact, ask brilliant questions, and there were plenty of times when my answer was, I don't know. But nothing calamitous happened. In fact, I think part of why you chose me for this honor today is that I was always honest about what I didn't know, and then I followed up. Sometimes I had to admit that the answer was embarrassingly simple. Sometimes you asked about obscure doctrinal puzzles, and I explained how I unraveled them. And sometimes your questions turned out not to have satisfying answers, which is a useful learning experience in itself. When I was a budding physicist, I thought scientists had already figured out most things about the world. But I learned in physics graduate school that many basic questions still lack satisfying answers. I remember being asked, as part of my qualifying exams, to explain how an individual cell, like an amoeba, crawls across a surface, and to design an electrical measurement technique to learn more about crawling cells. At first, I was daunted by the idea that I could add anything to the quite complete explanation of cell motion that I was sure biologists already had. But it turns out that there is a lot we don't know. After more hours immersed in the biology literature than I would like to admit, I was able to figure out what the current scientific models were, what evidence there was for them, what questions remained, and how one might use some of the tools of physics to help fill those gaps. Now, crawling cells might seem like quite a digression in a law school graduation speech, but I think that recognizing how much uncertainty exists in the world of natural laws makes it seem less surprising that there should be so much uncertainty in the world of human-made laws. Sometimes there aren't answers, and sometimes the answers need refining in light of new evidence. Indeed, I think a defining characteristic of a scientist is a willingness to change your mind in the face of contrary evidence, and that this is a virtue well worth embracing. I want you to take a minute right now and ask yourself, what is something that you have changed your mind about, and why? I don't mean something like what you want for dinner or which class to take at the beginning of a quarter. I mean some significant fact about the world. If we were in the classroom, I'd make you write it down and then chat with your neighbor about it, but at least take a minute to really think about it. Maybe some of you changed your mind after learning something from one of us. Perhaps you were convinced that the trend toward integrated healthcare will save money and improve patient outcomes, and then you became less certain after reading Dan Kessler's work on hospital competition. Perhaps you thought that adversarialism was an entrenched part of American legal culture, and then you learned from Amalia Kessler, no relation, that it is actually a modern invention. Perhaps you believed the hype that information disclosure and checklists are cheap and easy fixes to problems of administrative discretion. And then you read Dan Ho's research on the inadequacy of posted restaurant grades and food safety inspection checklists. I used to believe that the solution to public polarization on climate change was better science education. And then my own research with other scholars convinced me that more scientifically literate people are actually more polarized. I suspect many of you have also helped change each other's minds through the many discussions you've had on campus. Late night chats in Munger, Federalist Society debates, LLM students sharing details about other legal systems, students of color sharing their experiences of law school this spring. You are not just amazing students, you are also amazing teachers. And I've had students tell me that what stood out most from their Stanford education was the things they learned from their peers, both inside and outside the classroom. I got to see some of this in my classes on intellectual property, which is a somewhat unusual area of law in that there aren't deep partisan divides and high-profile lawsuits against the current administration. And at first glance, our IP system seems to be working pretty well. We keep getting new patented technologies like life-saving medicines and cool smartphones. And under our copyright laws, we have a wealth of creative production, ranging from self-published fan fiction to the latest Marvel movies. Plus, IP cases give us plenty of fun class props, like the parody Louis Vuitton dog toy, the Chewy Vuitton. But, as noted by my favorite Marvel Avenger, Black Panther's genius little sister, Shuri, just because something works doesn't mean it can't be improved. Those of you who've taken an IP class with me know that there's remarkably little credible empirical evidence on even the simple question of whether stronger IP rights actually encourage research investments. And I think this uncertainty and your lack of deep prior beliefs about the right answers made IP a wonderful area for us to have real conversations about the effect of legal institutions, ranging from the impact of the blurred lines copyright case on cultural appropriation to the impact of international patent treaties on the millions of people who die every year due to lack of access to essential medicines. Some of you told me that our class discussions caused you to change your mind about the effect of IP on the issues you care about, and that appreciating the magnitude of the big picture empirical problems help you recognize how much good you can do by tackling little issues and getting them right. And I hope you will continue to take this willingness to discuss difficult topics with open minds to other areas of law that may seem even more intractable. I know you can do this because I saw it happen in my home this spring among those of you who came for our discussion group on science and the law. Our group included scientists and non-scientists, conservatives and liberals. But even with some opposing views on polarizing issues, you were willing to admit that you didn't have all the answers and to listen to each other with respect. My favorite session was when we discussed nuclear energy. You were initially divided between those who thought it should be subject to less regulation and greater investment, including to address climate change, and those who thought that the health and environmental risks were unacceptably high. And during our discussion, a number of you changed your minds, even if the shift was just from having a strong view of the right policy to acknowledging doubt and uncertainty. But I hope you won't stop there and use uncertainty as an excuse for inaction. Admitting doubt doesn't mean that you shouldn't worry about it, or that your job as a lawyer is just to come up with arguments to support whatever your client wants the answer to be. As you've learned from your time at Stanford, being a lawyer means more than having an arsenal of arguments. It means joining a profession, and one with a deep commitment to public service. You've already demonstrated an amazing dedication to public interest work, with more students graduating with pro bono distinction than for any Stanford class in history. Yeah. But the public service of lawyering is about more than pro bono hours. It's also about approaching all your work with integrity and a commitment to getting things right, whether you're ensuring the accuracy of your representations to a court or figuring out what aspects of a deal are actually most important to your client's interests. As Stanford Law School graduates, you are as well positioned as anyone in the world to be contributing to the ongoing development of the legal system. And based on the many of you I've gotten to know, that makes me optimistic about the future. So, as you receive your diplomas on this glorious California summer day, I hope you will take the time to reflect on what entering the legal profession really means to you. Who is going to look up to you as their superhero? What will you do with that privilege? What will you do when you encounter a question to which you don't know the answer? As I've told many of you, one of the best parts of teaching is getting to revel in your students' successes and to pretend that you had something to do with it. And my colleagues and I can't wait for each of you to come back and make us feel like we did. So thank you again, and congratulations.